On this video, I answer a community member's question: how do I break the cycle of creating dysfunctional, painful relationships? I'm Alan Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator, and I like to talk about how to heal attachment trauma and improve our relationships. And on this video, we're answering a question that comes from the membership community, Improve Your Relationships, and it's about seeing the dysfunctional pattern play out multiple times and experiencing the pain of endings and wanting to do something different, and yet it doesn't change. We do the same thing. We create the same relationship again, and it's hard to break the cycle. Let me read specifically the question from this member in the community. It says, another relationship just ended. I keep creating the same dysfunctional relationship over and over again. It is painful. What is wrong with me? How do I break this cycle? So first of all, empathy to this person. Many of us can relate. Empathy for this experience. Now, before I go any further on the video and really to move into this question, I want to share with you that if you value the videos, my video here, if you get benefit, please consider becoming a sustaining supporter. You can do so by making a donation. You can join us in the membership community, or you could also purchase one of my courses, one of which is called The 4 Attachment Distress Responses. Thank you in advance for your contribution. Now, this type of video, although might sound like a Q&A, question and answer, it's technically Q&R, and what I describe is that R stands for reflection. We're not so much interested in me dictating and telling you something, the answer is this, this, and this. Instead, I want to empower you. I want to inspire in you to reflect on the ideas. Use my answers here, how I craft and explore this topic, use that as a template for you to create your own awareness and drop down into your own answers, your own truth of how you might answer this question for yourself. There is no such thing as, there's a talk recently about do the work. Are you doing the work? Do your work. And it's presented like we have figured out how to do the work, as if there's a recipe. There's no such thing as work. It's process. You're entering into a very intimate, transformational, subjective place of personal relating, and you're staring at yourself, looking in the mirror, and yourself is looking back at you. And it's in this place where, through compassion and tenderness, your path illuminates. There's many paths. There's no one path, the same way that there's no just one how to do the work. That doesn't it doesn't equate. Instead, we're looking at process, and process means engaging in your own healing process that is going to mindfully support your growth and your maturing. And there's a whole myriad of ways that we could answer this question, but there is only one way that you can answer it for yourself. And you're not going to find it on social media or in an Instagram account, say, do these 5 things, do these 8 things. It really doesn't work like that. So that's why I'm setting up this engagement, what you and I are talking about, as a more a reflection, self-reflection. Journal these, take these ideas as journal prompts, sit down, write about it, talk to a friend, and figure out what works for you. What is your path? Also, if you like this video, do all the things and you know what I'm talking about, which means click the subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help support the channel. So let's jump back in. I want to read the question again. The community member says, another relationship just ended. I keep creating the same dysfunctional relationships over and over again. It's painful. What's wrong with me? How do I break this cycle? And to repeat what we started with, there's an empathy piece joining that many of us have been here. Empathy to the person who wrote this question, empathy to all of us who have a first-hand knowledge and experience of what this is like, and that we enter a relationship wanting to do something different, and we have invested in bettering ourselves and learning some new skills and educating ourselves about how to go about creating securely attached relationships. And then nonetheless, we find ourselves so many months later, so many years later, realizing that we pretty much just did the same thing we did in the previous relationship, and we're still hurting, or we got hurt again, or we got burned again. So this question, there's a number of things that I can think about that many of us at some point have to ask ourselves. Now, this person who wrote said that the relationship has ended. Another relationship just ended. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is a willingness to take a break from relationships. It is very common for a number of folks who have attachment injuries, attachment trauma, and are leading from a place of insecure attachment, that there is a need to find a partner very quickly, find someone to date very quickly, and also to use the next relationship as a way to manage the grief and the sadness and the struggle of the relationship just ending. And oftentimes entering a new relationship can be considered a form of distraction. And to say, well, if I can distract myself enough, I will convince myself that I'm okay and fine. I can avoid feeling the feelings, avoid really going down into what is this all about for me. And I can prove, I will still prove I'm in the next relationship, will be successful, will be better. And I won't even have to feel these feelings that I don't want to feel. So something very radical for a number of us with attachment trauma, radical in the sense that it just doesn't even compute. We can't even fathom this idea of, what do you mean put relationship on hold? What do you mean put dating on hold? You can choose the time frame, but I am suggesting it is a bit of a challenge and has a bit of a longevity. We're not talking about 2 weeks, stop dating for 2 weeks, or you're not going to date for 2 months. Now, again, if that's your specific choice and you really think like 2 months is good enough, or that's the time frame for you, totally fine. But I'm saying, like, what would happen, just minimally? What if you just gave up on this whole dating thing and relationship thing for 6 months, and just you're not looking, you're not trying to find someone, and you're giving yourself permission to see what's there for you, to see what your experience is, as opposed to when oftentimes a number of people who start dating, when they're dating, it's just a lot of work, and they're creating a lot of extra, they're filling up their time through dates and activities and trying to find a partner, and it creates a distraction. And my exploration of listing this idea here is that what would happen if you really observed what distractions are you creating for yourself to exchange with the grief that you're feeling, and to really look at this pattern that you say that you want to break, to look at this cycle that you say you want to break. And by giving yourself permission to not have to try to keep going. It's very much a surrender. It's very much stop striving for the next relationship, stop trying to find someone, stop, etc. It's just stop, surrender. That's my first suggestion here as we explore what are we reflecting on when we ask ourselves this question. When we do that, we come into our grief. So how do I break the cycle? I need to really connect with the grief, the layers of the grief, the nuance, my relationship to the grief, the message in the grief, the transformation, it's the butterfly, it's the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. It's a death and a rebirth. Grief is attending to the part that's hurting. It's being in relationship to the part of you that is crushed. It's the heartbreak. And so grieving is a process of you're going to have to spend time with the heartbreak. And most of us don't like that. We're not, even if we're generally on board with taking care of our feelings and emotions and sadness, it still requires, it's still hard to swallow in that, like, oh, here we go. And it does require some fortitude to return to that place. So if we want to break the cycle of our dysfunctional relating, we are going to have to prioritize our grief work, which means what is grief work? We prioritize grieving skills. What are the skills that we need for grieving? And keep in mind that one loss generally does not have boundaries around it and limit our exploring of grief just unique to that loss. Usually what happens is that grief will, like a river that has tributaries, the grief river has all these other smaller brooks and channels, and it's a river that opens up into a larger river. And we might find ourselves, we didn't know we were going to access the greater river of grief, and we thought we were just grieving this one relationship, and in fact we're grieving childhood trauma, or in fact we're grieving the loss of a parent, or we're grieving the loss of who we thought we once were, and realized that we could no longer be that person any longer. It's an identity, the grief of loss of identity. So this all takes time, and it's all based upon sitting down and have a cup of tea with your own grief and be an observant attendant, bear witness to the grief, support, follow the path of the grief. Where does it take you? And we need some outlets for this. We need journaling and painting and talking and therapy, and we could use all the creative expressive arts, dance your grief, sing a song that includes grief lyrics, etc., etc. This engagement is a way to process, but it also transforms the grief. And we don't know how long that will take. Grief has a life of its own. We can't compartmentalize it and say, okay, in 6 months we're going to be done. Instead, what we do is we say, I'm willing to be a friend with grief and to befriend my grief as long as it needs, as long as I need. I am here for myself. Now, the next idea that I want to share with you, if we break the cycle, dysfunctional relating, I'm going to assume that there's a component of hiding and avoidance and pushing each other away, and one partner might be labeled as someone who was a bit more difficult to know and a bit more guarded in revealing their vulnerability and themselves. And regardless if you are the one who is more saddled with that judgment or that identity, for all of us, a common experience in unhealthy, insecurely attached, dysfunctional relating is about living guarded with our own vulnerability and how that impacts intimacy. So if we want to break the cycle, we need to inventory how we are also most probably, most likely all of us are to some degree in our own sophisticated ways, emotionally unavailable. And many of us do not like to hear this, especially if we can point towards having evidence and proving that, well, the relationship ended because the other person was emotionally unavailable, or the other person was not willing to change, or the other person did not listen to what we needed to do in order to practice sharing, revealing, connecting in an emotionally attuned way that's based upon presence. And if you wanted that and the partner didn't want that, it's so easy to point the finger and say, well, I think it's because they were lacking something. And it's very possible it's true. That story is still true. And if we want to break the cycle, what is it about us that is also emotionally unavailable, where we want to protect our emotional unavailability to the point where we would pick someone who might be more emotionally unavailable than we are, so that then we never have to be challenged or confronted with our own emotional unavailability. So it is a bit of a chicken and egg of, what came first, where do we point the finger? And we just say we're not going to point the finger. We are going to proactively choose to challenge ourselves around how we are defended and guarded against our own vulnerability. And for many of us, that even includes being defended and guarded with ourselves. So if we want to break the cycle of looking at relationships that don't work, there's probably a piece of emotional unavailability for everyone involved. And that would be very important to spend some time exploring that if we want to break this cycle. The next item that I want to share is to be able to tolerate the acid of loneliness. That's if loneliness is experienced as toxic. And for some of us, loneliness is very charged because it's linked to abandonment, betrayal, abuse, being emotionally ignored, living and feeling invisible. This could have been in a family system, family relationships, childhood. It could also be in your adult relationships. And yet many of us know of it from our childhood years. And what that means is that the being ignored, being abandoned, whatever your flavor of your attachment wound is, the secondary feeling, the result of living in the aftermath of being emotionally ignored, is that then you're also lonely. And loneliness gets fused or intertwined with the trauma experience, and that loneliness itself becomes a trigger to activate the trauma anxiety, the trauma symptoms, and the great need to protect ourselves in ways to pull away from relationship and to hide who we really are. So how do I break the cycle of relationships that keep ending over and over again, and I know that they're dysfunctional, and yet I still keep doing it? How do I break that cycle? I am going to have to learn to tolerate loneliness and experience loneliness in a new way so that it doesn't corrode, it doesn't eat away at me or erode like an acid, but in fact I can discover a new kind of loneliness that is not linked to trauma, that is actually manageable, and something as an adult that I need to learn how to be able to work with, and that it could be I can still function, and I'm not reactionary to when the loneliness enters into my experience or into my state of mind. Now, why this is so important is because on the first thing I said here was talking about a willingness to take a break. In my work with clients, in the work, hearing stories in the community, it is very common that many of us continue to find the next partner, and we even rush into the next relationship because we cannot manage our own loneliness. That we are frightened of ourselves. We're frightened of that chronic feeling of absence, and the loneliness reminds us of our disconnect, not being chosen, not good enough, not wanted, not a priority, unlovable. And so I've really seen with clients a number of times how loneliness is a gateway to all of those feelings, and none of those feelings are attractive. And so even when I enter loneliness, it just feels like this acid that's eating away at me. And I got to start dating again. I just need the next relationship. I can't manage. So the way we're going to break this cycle is you're looking at your relationship to loneliness, and this is not going to be easy. But I would consider that to be something, if we're taking an inventory of what we need to do to break the cycle, I would add that to the inventory. The next one is somewhat similar to loneliness, of framing it as a particular feeling state that then activates other feeling states, or more a struggle of difficult inner world experience. And that has to do with shame. And I could be reading into this particular question. The person that wrote the question said, I keep creating the same dysfunctional relationships over and over again. It's painful. What's wrong with me? Now, maybe it's a very neutral statement. Maybe this person is completely objective and neutral and just saying, objectively, I think there is something wrong. And in shorthand, I'm going to use the construct in language to just say, what's wrong with me? I don't mean it in a strongly pejorative way. I don't mean it as to belittle my character. I would ask the person, if they're a client, I would say, when you say what's wrong with you, are you saying that just as a neutral observation, or are you saying that to shame yourself? And with all my years of experience, and even the tone of voice when you hear people, a very high percentage of people say, well, I'm shaming myself. So if you want to break the cycle of these dysfunctional type of relationships, you're going to need to look at shame, and how does shame drive your decisions, and how is shame part of the way that you relate, and if relationships fail, how it activates this, how it brings dormant shame out into the open. And it's very possible that if you shame yourself, if you're judgmental about your relationships not working out, you probably do not turn that off, and you bring some form of shame and shaming yourself into the relationship. That shame oftentimes limits our spontaneity. It limits our authenticity. It limits our ability to improvise in the moment, to reveal who we are, to be vulnerable. The shame gets in the way. We're trying to maneuver around or with the shame and not reveal that we have shame. And we do this at the expense of our own freedom of spirit. So if we want to break this pattern of dysfunctional, insecurely attached relating, we're probably going to have to do some exploration around how is shame an active part of the way I relate with myself and with others. I want to share the next idea is about you don't have to do everything alone by yourself in your head. We need community. We need fellowship. We need a board of directors to support us. We need, the phrase, it takes a village. We need 2 villages. We need a group of people that we can tap into who are like-minded, that we value togetherness. And that your story is my story, and my story is your story. Your healing is my healing, and vice versa. And we all learn from each other. We're all growing simultaneously. We aspire to the level of our peers, and we benefit from the level of our peers. So we set our sights high, and we need to find other people who also are participating in their own personal healing process, participating in their growth, participating in their maturing. Think of the web of interconnectedness. Everything's interconnected. The grapes on the vine cannot grow without the sunshine, without the minerals in the dirt, without the farmer pruning the vines, without the insects that, live on the vine, etc. Everything is needed and plays a part. And that's true of community. This isn't something that you just sit at a coffee shop by yourself with a journal and you broke the cycle because you cognitively mapped it out for yourself. We learn through corrective experiences relationally. If woundedness, if you were hurt relationally, then healing will happen relationally. And this can happen outside of partner relationships. It's people who we invest in each other. We practice sharing our vulnerability. And we can do this outside of a partner relationship. And I know a number of people say, well, that's really different. It's not the same. It's not the same if, the partner relationship is so special, well, that's my next point. How do we heal and break the cycle of dysfunctional relationships? We have to start framing relationships where we don't overvalue a partner relationship as being some culmination of great success and existing on a level and in a way that you could only experience a deep loving connection if it's in the context of that romantic partnership. That is so limiting, because if you look around in the world, there's a lot of love. There's a lot of people who want to be loved. There's a lot of people who are literally dying from the lack of love. And if we can value the interactions that we have in friendships, and value the interactions that we have with coworkers, and value the interactions we have with family members, it is helpful, it is beautiful, it is nice when we have a partner, a romantic relationship. And you remember the first idea I said, well, why don't we just take a break for a little bit of chasing that particular romantic partner, that relationship, and instead let's invest in all the other relationships around us. And we might need to recalibrate and change our judgment of how those relationships somehow are less than, and the romantic partnership is so much more and better. That also might be one reason why our relationships are dysfunctional and not working, because we're putting so much focus and pressure and burden on that relationship delivering a depth of emotional connection and satisfaction and nourishment that it can't. Because we also need to find nourishment, connection, and satisfaction in many other relationships outside of that relationship. Let's bring this video to a close. I hope that this was helpful. Before we go, I do want to say share some encouragement that healing from attachment trauma is possible. That there's a lot of studies and that show, and the general feeling, or what we observe in different healing communities, is that evolution, learning new, better skills of relating, is very much possible. And I like to say, why do we do this work? And it's because emotional connections matter. And then I say, well, why do I do it or make these videos? And that's to offer some encouragement and hope. And that many of us feel in relationships fragmented or disconnected or broken, or like we question our worth. And in order to engage in our own personal healing process, it's going to be to confront those feelings of being broken or fragmented. And I like the phrase remember, R-E-member. Like, we put ourselves back together, but only this time anew. We're choosing to be creative, and we're creatively putting ourselves together anew. And I hope that this you experience is some encouragement to keep going and to keep learning. If you like this video, please click the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. It really does help support the channel. Also, as I said, this video, the question here came from a community member through the community program, Improve Your Relationships. And there's a link in the description, information in the description, if you would like to join us and also talk about relationships. Thank you so much. See you next time on the next video.